they got a notice that they could go back. He said, well, the teacher said, you know what, don't tell us to go back. Just be
Test. Testing. Testing 1, 2. Test. Testing.
We just got busy to do, we wrote there in December. But Abby called them, so Abby was leaving. And I said, I saw you writing this. That's good. I said, they keep off that now, because I can't talk to you. But they're doing that. Their landlord is, it's a bad, but they gotta be on, you know, upstairs on that. Yeah. It's just a whole picture, so they definitely.
What I'm getting at is if she, as a minimum, keep it, she can email you the document, it's for it. And you can print it out. Well, yeah. But then see, there's things you have.
And another one, she thinks it's going bad, that's true.
Unless it has, they want to print it.
He likes more buildings go up and people see it. I thought maybe they're crying.
Yeah.
That is right away. That here. So it's true. Yeah. It's supposed to be. Didn't say. It's supposed to be there about the arm. They're gone. Neither.
Okay. We're doing something different?
Yes.
Okay.
Go back. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I just got hard to start working with what I'm done. Right, when I have.
Have you had a?
Yeah, so we had to make that room. That garage.
Get vaccine?
That's
Oh, the
okay.
vaccines.
And
Oh, that's right.
About something else.
Yes.
I told her, like, tomorrow. It's tomorrow. Yeah. So that's 3 weeks from
No,
that
it's
day.
tomorrow when she got in for the vaccine.
Yeah.
Her friend got her in.
Smart one. No, never, she got it in one day.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, so that's why.
Doctor has done a good job.
Yeah. Yes.
And that's it, about 3 weeks. It said, fully back for anybody that needs a vaccine.
You know, when it's you, what did they want?
I don't know.
Well,
There they are.
yeah, yeah. They got the vaccine.
Oh, very good.
Yeah. Sure. No, I said, in charge of it. So I didn't do a good job. I was. Oh, yeah. You don't need. Good, how about you? So good. So, but otherwise, you, family, the one okay too? Good. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'd like to get that Johnson one to tell you one. Yeah, I'm quite excited. That's too short. Yeah, I guess Beaver County.
Yeah. Whatever. Okay, all right.
So Mary Eva, you want to let people know about this? Before we get started this morning. Yep, before we get started this morning, Mary Eva would like to go and let people know about an event that's going on down at the Creation Museum and all. So you want to?
Okay, this was a couple weeks ago when, Bob was saying about the Southern Gospel and all of that. Well, there's an event down there well, it was scheduled last October, then it was supposed to be this April, like next month, but then they postponed it again till October. It's a 3-day event, and for those of you that may have liked especially the Southern Gospel flavor, it's kind of like a 3-day pass. And you can go to the Creation Museum and the Ark Encounter, but they're 40 miles apart, so it's not like you just walk from one to another. But then for anybody that follows Southern Gospel, it's the Collingsworth family and the Booth brothers, because I know he played a couple weeks ago, the Booth brothers. And then the Collingsworth family is quite gifted.
Oh, they're amazing.
Yeah, they're.
Of all the groups, Booth Brothers and Collingsworth are probably my top two.
Yeah. And, but it's also addition to the Ark Encounter. And so if you even don't know who I'm talking about, but you've enjoyed Bob's, the Creation Museum just follows right along with what Bob has been talking about. And it's really phenomenal, but it's really also a musical event. And we have brochures. I gave Bob a couple of brochures.
So anybody wants brochure? Here's brochures here. Going once, going twice.
Or if you want more information just about the thing in general, just, you can let us know, because we've been down to both a number of times. So it's quite phenomenal just to go down to see the Ark and Creation Museum, much less with all the music that's involved also.
Okay, then with that, we will, unless someone else has some announcement they need to make. Anyone else? We'll see if the technology is behaving today. Oh, that doesn't look good in the second one.
So everyone of every tongue could read God's word on a page. The truth he would give to all, it would live forever, for every age. From the creation to the revelation and all that is written between, I have discovered from cover to cover the purest of truth can be seen. I believe every word in the word, every line is divine inspiration. Through the ages his pages brought heaven to earth. I believe every word in the word. I am a Christian on a wonderful mission. God's word tells me what I should do. A modern day disciple who believes that the Bible is holy and totally true. The skeptics deny, the scholars have tried to prove the Bible is flawed. But I proudly stand with a word in my hand, firmly claiming it all. I believe every word in the word, every line is divine inspiration. Through the ages his pages brought heaven to earth. I believe every word in the word. Believe every word in the word. Every line is divine inspiration. Through the ages its pages brought heaven to earth. Believe. Through the ages its pages brought heaven to earth. Believe. I believe every word in the word.
Okay, that didn't work so good. Let's see if we can go back and see if it's happier this time. It's not happier. Okay, let's see if technology always gets in your way. It's not working at all. You're not going to see the video part.
Nothing on earth can ever compare to the glory that's awaiting over on the other side. We'll be walking down the streets made of purest gold in a land where we'll never grow old. No right peace and joy there'll be where we'll ever abide. It makes me want to go to a land that's Lord. It makes me want to see all the saints who have gone before. It makes me want to join and sing with the happy angel band. It makes me want to hear it say, well done, welcome home, your race is run. When I sing his praise while the angels roll, it makes me want to go. God's children have been longing for the day when the Savior will call his bride away. There will be shouting of joyful praise on that heavenly shore. We will live the sweetest harmony ever known as we gather all around the throne. Glad old Santa's hair will ring at the feet of our Lord. It makes me want to go to a land that's Lord. It makes me want to see. It makes me want to join and sing with the happy angel band. It makes me want to hear it say, well done, welcome home, your race is run. We'll sing his praise while the angels roll. It makes me want to go. It makes me want to go. It makes me want to. All the saints who are gone, it makes me want to join and sing with the happy angel band. It makes me want to hear him say, well done, welcome home, your race is run. We'll sing his praise while the angels roll. It makes me want to go. It makes me want to hear him say, well done, welcome home, your race is run. We'll sing his praise while the angels roll. It makes me want to go. We'll sing his praise while the angels roll. It makes me want to go.
Now, what you failed to see on that, and this isn't showing up here either. I don't know if we're live or not out in the rest of the world. But in any event, what you failed to see on that is that's a tribute quartet at the National Quartet Convention, singing that song. But anyway, let's open with a word of prayer. Lord, we thank you that we can once again come here today and study what you've given for us. Help us understand what you have, what your word says with respect to creation, the impact that it has on our salvation and our understanding of the gospel in general. Be with us this morning. Amen.
Hey, Bob, this is Don.
Yes.
We can hear you in Zoom land.
Oh, good. That's a good thing because I'm not seeing me in Zoom land, so I don't know what's going on. But as long as it's working, I don't care.
We got you.
Okay. Okay, that's not working either. Wow, we're doing great here. Let's try this. So, in review once again, first week, what we took a look at is salvation is not dependent. Why is this totally broken? Give me 1 second here. Maybe it's. I know that is so true. Okay, first week, we took a look at salvation is not dependent on a actual literal 6 days. You do not have to believe a literal 6 days to be saved. However, I believe it's the most harmonious way to interpret the scriptures. Creation versus evolution is really a real world issue. It's a God versus no God issue. Everybody's biased. We all look at things, and honestly, as I'm putting all of this together, I'm cherry picking the data that I want to present to you. There's other data from the other side that they could skew things differently as well. So it's all dependent on the way you look at the data and how you want to interpret it. Evolution isn't science either. It's religion. You can't go back in time and recreate creation. So they have just as much faith involved in their belief system as creation does. Okay, let's see if we're going to move on. No, we're not. Most straightforward interpretation of Genesis is a literal 6 days. Morning and evening the first day, morning and evening the second day, etc. Harmonizing the order of the creation account with the evolution account doesn't jive. They're out of sequence with each other, so it's really tough to twist it into progressive creation or gap theory or any other theory that you try to do. The two are not harmonious. Haha, now we're getting there. Third week, we took a look at biology and biochemistry. We talked about the fact of irreducible complexity, the fact that there's, even if you're building a mousetrap or something really small, bacteria, for example, there's an irreducible amount of stuff that has to go in this combined in a certain way to actually make that thing work. And we talked about the ridiculously low odds of that actually succeeding by random chance. We talked that natural selection and mutations do exist, but they don't actually present any new information. They're always going and degrading the genetic information, not increasing it. And there's no steps that the evolutionists can figure out to how you get to male and female. Fourth week, we took a look at astronomy. We looked at the absolute magnificence that we see in God's creation. And the universe declares God's glory in Psalms. The age of the universe is not consistent with the billions of years. And we talked about that being a problem for both creationists and also for evolutionists. The universe is too big to be such uniform temperature throughout if it started from a big bang. There's just not enough time, even though it's 92 billion light years across and it's 14 billion years or 16 billion years, whatever the current date is, to the beginning of the Big Bang. There's still not anywhere near enough time to be uniform temperature. But creationists also have the same problem in terms of if the universe is so big, how does the light from things that are 45 billion light years away get to us in 6,000 years? So I actually believe that we're going to find, this is getting off topic again, but I actually believe that over the next several years, decades, whatever, we're going to find that Einstein's theory of relativity can go yet a step further, and there's something more to understand about time, energy, and matter, and that will start harmonizing all of this with respect to a young creation. I'm not bright enough to figure that out myself, but I think that that's what we're going to see. I think we're going to see some harmonizing theory of those three that's even a step beyond where Einstein is. We talked about the Earth being unique. It's uniquely positioned. It's uniquely suited for life. And we talked to the distant starlight. Yes?
I got a comment. If God created the universe, he could have created it if the light was shining.
Absolutely. He could have absolutely created the appearance of age into the universe. That is certainly possible, and it's not even unreasonable to think that way, because when God created the earth and he created Adam and Eve, he didn't create Adam as an embryo that had to go and grow up into being a person. He didn't go and create a tree as a seed and said, oh, by the way, Adam, you got to wait 10 years until that thing produces a fruit so you can eat it. God did produce or create all of creation with age. So there already were trees that were producing fruit, and Adam was already grown. So it's not unreasonable to think that if he created those things with appearance of age, he wouldn't have created the universe with appearance of age as well. So that's certainly a possibility as well. In week 5, we talked about dating methods. We talked about it really depends on the assumptions that you go in with, the constancy of the rate. If you assume a uniformitarian kind of a rate and things are uniform, that'll give you one set of assumptions. If you assume some asymptotic or exponential rate, it'll give you a different set of assumptions. We talked about tree rings being an actually good indicator because those are pretty consistent. Problem with tree rings are they can only get you back a few thousand years or a couple thousand years at best. They're not going to get you the whole way back to the beginning of creation. They're not going to get you even to Noah's Ark. They can't overlap them that well, that long, but they do work for shorter time frames. We talked about Niagara Falls, and Niagara Falls is a great example of the fact that it's very inconsistent with millions or billions of years. It's eroding at a certain rate. It only has so many miles that from where it started to where it is. It couldn't have been eroding for millions of years and still be there. We talked about radioisotope dating and the fact that that only works on certain kinds of rock, and the results are extremely inconsistent. So even things like Mont St. Helens eruption, the data from that, it varies everywhere from some of the dating methods saying it's 0 years old to some of them saying it's 250,000 years old, when in reality it's 40 years old. Carbon-14 only being applicable to living organisms, and with its half-life, therefore only being suitable for the thousands of years again. We talked about additional evidence the next week in terms of the Earth's magnetic field. We talked about catastrophic plate tectonics reshaping the entire Earth, the amount of helium in the atmosphere, the sediment in the sea, the amount of salt in the oceans. All of those things don't prove that it was a young creation, but they're certainly very inconsistent with millions or billions of years. They're far more consistent with a young Earth. We talked about the geologic evidence, polystrate trees that go through multiple layers of sediment. That how could those layers of sediment be laid down over millions or even thousands of years and have the tree not decay in the process? They were laid down quickly. Surface features, ripples, footprints, other stuff like that. Bioturbation, the idea that you've got worms or roots of plants, things like that, disturbing the soil as it's growing. There's no evidence of those things in the geologic record. They should exist if there's layers of soil that, you have a little bit of soil deposition from some event over whatever, 100 years, whatever, you're going to have some kind of growth in that before the next layer is put on top. None of that evidence exists. So it really points to a much more catastrophic one-time event. And soft sediment deformation. I actually love that when you ride down the road and you can see on the sides where they cut through interstates and the like, you can see the rock layers. And they aren't always necessarily nice flat layers. Oftentimes they're waving and rippled. That's telling you that there's some kind of deformation that occurred. And that deformation occurred when the soils were more plastic, not after they'd already formed. We then talked about the origin of death and why this is an important piece. If death had existed prior to the fall and for millions of years, why do we need Christ? There's no point. The whole idea is that death occurred because of man's sin and fall in the Garden of Eden. And it all ties together. We talked about the flood. We talked about that it was an historical event about 4,500 years ago. It was God's judgment on man. It killed all man and animals, except those that were on the ark. Destroyed and reshaped everything. There's a lot of geologic evidence for it. Grand Canyon is a great example of looking at all the layers. And again, looking at those layers in terms of being laid down quickly, not just layer after layer, thousands of years or millions of years apart, because there's no evidence of erosion through those layers other than the massive cut that the Grand Canyon produced. Because if you look out at, if you're standing at the Grand Canyon, you look out and you see just miles and miles of just layers and layers there. But you don't see, oh, I see things that were eroded and then filled back in with additional stuff and then eroded in a different way. You don't see any of that. You see clean layers, and then you see a massive cut coming through those. That tells you that there was a massive something that put down all those layers, and then after that, a cut that came through to make it happen. And that's not, and Grand Canyon is not the only place. It occurs many other places in the world. We talked about catastrophic plate tectonics, reshaping the Earth potentially at this time, that it would have been one larger continent to begin with, and then the plates all moving. We then talked about Noah's Ark. We talked about the credibility of the Ark in terms of, could everything fit on the Ark? Was it actually large enough? And the answer is yes, assuming that you understand that he's not taking 2 of every kind of dog and 2 of every kind of horse. He's taking 2 horses. He's taking 2 dogs. He's not taking 2 chihuahuas and 2 beagles and 2 something else's. And by those calculations, there's plenty of room. And then the species further subdivided after the flood. The ark was an enormous task for Noah, but he didn't have to actually bring the animals. God told him he'll take care of that part. He brought the animals. Animals distribution after the flood. We talked about the fact that, and we're going to talk more about that today as well, about the fact that it was relatively easy for the animals to migrate and move after the flood because of land bridges and other things connecting these continents so they could get to each place. We then took a look at the fossil evidence in the next week, which was races or the different people groups, where they come from. We talked about there being 4 main people groups, and that those all started from the same 8 individuals that came off of the ark. And the amount of difference between any of those people groups is extremely, extremely small genetically. Human population growth. We talked about supporting a young Earth. If you trace this back, the current population could have started from a pair of individuals a little over 1,100 years ago. So there's ample time. It's certainly not consistent with, millions of years where you would find a lot more people on Earth and a lot more fossils of those people, not just the people, the animals, and everything else which don't exist. We talked about fossilization being rare, but it's an event that occurs typically in catastrophic kind of events. We also talked about, I don't know if I have it here, the idea that human remains, many of the ancient peoples did bury their dead. So you should find a lot of fossil remains of people if people had existed for millions and millions of years, and you don't find enough to support millions of years. The fossil record does not support the transition between the species. And we showed some of that last week in terms of they find 2 little fragments of bone for something and they create an entire animal out of it. And it's like, wow, that's pretty imaginative to me. So they're taking their evidence and using it, twisting it however they need to go and fit their narrative. But in defense, I'm cherry picking the data I'm presenting to you and telling you this is how it fits. So everyone's doing the same thing. It's the glasses that you put on. And there's the fossil record does not support transitions from ape to man. It just doesn't exist. So today, we're going to be talking about the Ice Age. Not exactly that Ice Age, but close. So Ice Age views. Evolutionist and the old world creationist, a uniformitarian kind of view. They believe in multiple ice ages, approximately every 20 to 30 million years. And the current ice age began about 2 million years ago and ended about 11,000 years ago. Young Earth creationist view believes that there's one ice age, began at the end of the flood about 4,500 years ago, lasted 500 to 700 years, and it was punctuated by some intermittent warmer periods in the middle. So first of all, are there any Bible references that might indicate something, some support? The Bible does not. The Bible does go and say and God created on the first day this, second day this. He does say that, but he never says, and then he says, we're going to flood the earth. But he doesn't go back and then say, oh, and by the way, now I'm going to put a deep freeze over the whole earth after the flood. So we don't actually find that in the Bible. However, we do have good reference in Job. Okay, I got to put the glasses on now. From its chamber cometh the whirlwind, and the cold from the scattering winds. By the breath of God, ice is given, and the broad waters are frozen fast. That's in Job 37. Have you entered the storehouses of the snow, or have you seen the storehouses of the hail, which I have reserved for the time of trouble, for the day of battle and war? Another reference in Job. From whose womb did the ice come forth? And who has given birth to the frost of heaven? The waters became hard like stone, and the face of the deep is frozen. This is all from the book of Job. Now, what do we know about Job? When was it, and does it tell us anything? Well, Job probably lived sometime between the Tower of Babel and Abraham. So where does that actually put him in history? Well, obviously he's after the flood. Approximately 2200 to 2000 BC, if you're looking at those things, which is if the flood was about 2500 BC, 4500 years ago, that puts Job right about 300 years into, or 300 years after the flood. So he would have been a living eyewitness to the Ice Age. He lived in Uz. Now, Uz is this little area right here. You see Israel on the map right there. And to put this in perspective, Chris, the UAE, is right there. So that's where we go and visit all the time. I had to put Chris on the map. So, but the reason I put Chris there is because I know what that weather's like. We've been there. Right now, if I pulled up my phone, I'd probably find out it's about 85 to 90 degrees today in the UAE.
77 right now, but it's easy over there.
Oh, that's right. It's the end of the day over there. So it probably was 80 something during the day. It will hit 115 in the summer, and their winter is just a miserable 65 degrees. So, so just to let you know, that's not very conducive for snow and ice. Now, they do have once in a while, and I'm talking rare, they might have a little bit of snow in the mountains that they can go to. And we're talking, they better hit it quick before it melts off when the sun comes out. So it might flurry a little bit and they run up and see the snow and boom, it's gone. That's the extent of what that region knows about snow and ice. So why is it Job is talking about deep freeze and ice and all these other things? Well, the reality is, and I'll show it on another slide here, this area was frozen during the last ice age. It came down that far. He would have firsthand seen ice over in here. So that would explain the references he's got to snow and ice and deep freeze. So ice, deep frozen, obviously unheard of in the Middle East. So if there was no ice age, what was he talking about? I already mentioned that. So how extensive was the ice age? And that's what we're going to get into here now. So this is a current map. That's a little darker than I expected. Now, keep in mind that this entire north region, the Earth is a sphere. So anytime you look at a sphere projected on a map, it distorts things big time as you head towards the poles. So this Antarctica is not that big. Remember, it's a sphere, so the whole thing's going to round down on the bottom. Same thing happens on the top. The North Pole is not that big, so it's all going to squish together at the top. But then, so currently, it's about 3% of the Earth's coverage is with snow and ice. 11% of the land area is covered with ice, and 5% of Alaska. If you look at the ice age, that's in the bottom. 8% of the surface, and it doesn't look like 8% again, keep in mind the sphere. The whole north region was ice, and the whole bottom. So 8% of the Earth's surface, 25% of the landmass, 33% of Alaska was covered in ice in the last ice age. Last ice age, or in our view, the only ice age. I'm disappointed that you can't see it that well in this, but right there is where we live. We are right smack at the edge of where the ice age ended up. And you can see evidence all over the place here. Moraine State Park, moraine comes from deposits from glaciers. That's what the word moraine means. Right next to us, right up Connoquenessing Lancaster line, a lot of our property that we own up there, one of the properties, they got these massive boulders all through them. Those were there deposited when the ice age ended. It came right to here. So we're right smack at that line of where the glaciers actually came to. So we have a lot of actual good geologic evidence that you could look at if you're interested for the glaciers coming down this far. If you look at what the average temperatures are, currently on the Earth, the average global temperature is 57 degrees Fahrenheit. During the Ice Age, it wasn't a whole lot different, but a little bit, 46. This is also another, go off track yet again. This is also another thing that just is amazing to me. We're talking what, 11 degrees difference between current temperatures and Ice Age. And think of the drastic differences that made to the livability of this planet. We do certainly live in a Goldilocks kind of a planet. The Earth is so uniquely positioned. So many things have to come together just right. I was actually reading this week, I keep getting diverted, reading this week about what would it take to colonize Mars? And if you start going down the science of what it takes to colonize something like Mars, the first thing that was being discussed was, well, what do you do about oxygen, just to get enough oxygen to breathe? Because in our environment, I think it's 78% nitrogen. You might know less better than me. Our atmosphere is like 78% nitrogen, and I don't know what it is, 15% oxygen, something like that. On Mars, the oxygen is ridiculously small. It's mostly carbon dioxide, but a ridiculously small, like less than 0.1% oxygen. So to actually extract and make oxygen a high enough percentage of the environment is a tremendous scientific undertaking to make that work. But the reason I mention it is that goes to once again tell me that we live in a very unique environment. This Earth is extremely unique. The temperature is unique. The atmosphere, the water we have to work with, all those ingredients. And if you did the math on the probability of that, finding that on another planet, it's again so ridiculously small that we are the only ones. So how do glaciers come about? Well, the necessary conditions for to form a glacier: warm oceans, especially at mid and high latitudes; cold land masses, especially in the summer. So glaciers and ice are really no different than any other hydrological formation. So it's water evaporates over an ocean, turns into clouds, clouds come over land, and they rain. You either rain, or if it's cold enough, it snows. And then that ends up melting, goes back to the ocean, and the cycle continues. So it's a really simple process. The key is you need to get enough moisture into the atmosphere to go over land and do something. That's the whole recipe. So warm water evaporates, produces more clouds. Clouds move over land, precipitation. Cold land masses cause the precipitation to be snow instead of rain. So one ice age or many? I'm a believer that there was one ice age, and we'll see some evidence here in a minute. The secular view, uniformitarian view, is that there's many ice ages. What about the differences between, a lot of people go and say, well, you know, is it water produce this? Did running water produce this, or did glaciers moving produce this? Well, there's a difference. Glaciers will produce a till. They'll actually go through and they'll grind, and they'll take this material and move it with them. So they'll produce stuff. They're actually scraping and grinding away at things. Glaciers also carve the rocks. So it's not smooth. They'll take, so say a glacier is moving along and it's got this big boulder in its mix of snow and ice. That's actually going to gouge whatever it is that it's running through. So you're going to end up seeing these lines that are produced by glaciers, quite different than smooth surface features produced by running water. So based on the differences, the evidence for earlier ice ages is very weak. It's very difficult to go and demonstrate that there was one ice age and then 20 million years later there's another ice age, because the evidence doesn't support, there's not enough evidence to show that, oh, there's striations going this way, 20 million years later there's striations going the other way. They can't find any of that kind of evidence. So it's difficult to actually say, oh, there's great evidence here for multiple ice ages. There's better evidence that there's one ice age and some water action as well. This was fun. I looked up in Wikipedia the evidence for the ice age, and they come up with three. There's geologic evidence. That's where you've got the rock scouring, the scratching, the deposition of till, the glacial moraines, so those big boulders, all that kind of stuff. That's good evidence, good geologic evidence for ice age, right? Glaciers. Chemical. This is the variation in the ratios of the isotopes and fossils. We talked about this before with, you know, the carbon-14 and radiometric dating. So they're using some of those techniques to go and say, okay, depending on what layers we're in as to what was deposited, can we determine when each of these events occurred? Third, paleontological evidence. That's the geographic distribution of where do you find the fossils? So if we can try to look at where we find fossils and say, oh, we find this fossil here, and 20 million later we find it here, maybe we can correlate that and determine that there were multiple ice ages for it. Well, even Wikipedia goes into on the geologic. Furthermore, this evidence was very difficult to date exactly. Chemical, this evidence can be confounded, however, by other factors recorded by radioisotope ratios. And the fossil evidence, this evidence is also difficult to interpret. But in spite of all of that, they come to the conclusion, and despite these difficulties, has provided a credible record of glacial and interglacials over the past few million years. So somehow they say that we can't really get much out of the geologic record. Fossils and radioisotope dating really aren't doing much for us, and the actual species of the fossils and where they're finding them, that's tough to interpret too. But don't worry, we've figured it out anyway. We've definitely got, you know, millions of years worth of glaciers and stuff that we can do. It just boggles me how they're extrapolating the coming up with the results they do with so little evidence for it. So I don't think it's very credible. So the old Earth explanation of so the explanation of ice ages from evolution. Temperature of the Earth decreased slowly over many years. So all of a sudden it's going along nice, and then ice age is supposed to come. So what happens? Temperature starts to go down for whatever reason. Maybe they're thinking the sun had more sunspots, and the temperature, the amount of energy getting to the Earth starts to decrease, and whatever their reason, they're thinking somehow the temperature is starting to drop. So this resulting lower temperature caused precipitation to be snow and subsequently not melt. Not a bad theory. So all of a sudden the temperatures are dropping. So now instead of it raining over the continents, it's going to snow more because the overall global temperature is down. Sounds reasonable. Therefore, it's going to start building up year after year. And that cycle goes on for 20 million years. Then all of a sudden it warms back up again. And then sometime later, the same thing happens again. So you got these cycles going on. Well, there's a lot of problems. One, a steady decrease in the Earth's temperature would cause the oceans to decrease in temperature as well and produce very little evaporation. That's a key ingredient. Think of our area in the winter. Lake Erie, you've all heard of lake effect snow. Well, what is lake effect snow? Lake effect snow is basically saying there's air coming over the lake, it's getting moisture out of the lake and it's coming over to us and it's snowing. Well, when's that possible? It's possible when Lake Erie is warm enough that enough moisture can get into the air and it's not frozen. Well, if the temperatures are slowly decreasing, you're going to have ice over the top of the ocean. You're not going to get much evaporation through that. The lower latitudes are going to end up having, they're going to cool down and less evaporation coming from them as well. So it's going to be very difficult to produce any real snow or ice out of that environment. So with little evaporation, there's no precipitation to cause the ice buildup. The result would look more like a frozen desert that you see on the left. This is a frozen desert in Antarctica. That's what you would see in their model. There's not enough moisture to actually get it to the continents. And they have very little explanation as to what would cause the temperature to cycle over that 20 to 30 million years, whether it's, the sun is changing in some way that we just get less energy, whatever. So there's very little evidence for a gradual onslaught of an ice age. So young Earth, you need warm oceans. Well, warm oceans are directly attributable to what we're talking about is this plate tectonics, this volcanic activity that would have occurred at the beginning of the flood, the fountains of the deep. The friction, the movement of the Earth's plates would create a tremendous amount of, so both of these put together cause a tremendous rise in the temperature of the oceans. Not only tremendous rise in the temperature, but a tremendous mixing of the oceans so that they all become more uniform because there's a lot of water activity going on at this point. Remember, the entire Earth was covered with water. That entire water is going to be circulating all over the place, and with tremendous volcanic activity and plate tectonic activity underneath, it's going to be warming up all that water throughout the entire globe. Michael Ord, a meteorologist and scientist that's written a lot on this topic, he's estimating that the water temperatures could have been upwards of 86 degrees. That's actually pretty nice. 86 degrees is great. 86 degrees is the water I go in when I go to Florida. It's not going to Lake Erie or to the Jersey coast or something where you go into 60-degree water. No, this is the way ocean temperatures should be. Is much more friendly to people. But if you have that temperature of water, think of what happens in the hurricane season. What feeds a hurricane? Warm water. That's what does it. So you need warm water and you need some air moving on it that then creates the moisture, brings the moisture evaporation up out. It's the exact same principles going on here. You need to get a lot of water, moisture into the air out of the oceans. The only way to do that is having warm oceans. Young Earth has explanations for how you get to warm oceans. You need cold continents. Well, that's what's also interesting. The whole theory that's going on here also produces cold continents in addition to warm oceans. The volcanic activity produces, it would not be just underground. So volcanic activity would have occurred all over, even on the land portions, and probably for substantially after the flood ended. Well, think of what happened in Mount St. Helens. A lot of ash gets up into the atmosphere. That ash goes very high, goes up into the stratosphere. The stratosphere is higher than the cloud layer. So it tends to stay there a while because you're talking small dust particles getting up into the atmosphere. So a significant amount of volcanic ash, that ash would remain in the upper atmosphere for quite a while and reduce the amount of sunlight that actually gets to the Earth. Therefore, the overall temperature would drop, less sunlight getting to the Earth. So this is a similar recap of that. So you've got the geologic and the hydrological activity during the flood causing all of this, movements of the Earth's crust. Substantial volcanic activity, warmer oceans and more uniformly mixed, and you get the dust and particles trapped in the stratosphere, reducing sunlight. And what you end up with is an effect like this. You've got, you can't really see it right here. They've got a layer of dust in the atmosphere. So it's going to end up reflecting sunlight off of that, so less sunlight is actually getting through. Now this effect has actually occurred, I should have written it down, but there was a volcano 150 years ago or whatever, substantial, 10 times what Mount St. Helens was. And that volcano produced enough ash into the upper atmosphere that the global temperatures actually dropped almost 1 degree for 1 year after that one event. So it's very plausible to believe that the amount of volcanic activity that occurred during and post-flood could have easily obscured the sun to produce a temperature, we were talking, what, 11 degrees? That's all we're talking about. We're not talking a huge amount different. It's very plausible to believe that there was enough activity to cause that to happen. So, cooler summers, heavier snow. So how long was the Ice Age? This Michael Ord estimates it was approximately 700 years for the polar waters to cool from the 30 degrees Celsius at 86 to 4 degrees Celsius. 500 years to cool from 30 down to 10. At 10 degrees Celsius, then the evaporation rate would cause no new accumulation of snow, because that's the key. It's like, just like with Lake Erie, the colder it gets, the less snow we get off of it each year. So the same thing would happen with the oceans. As they cool down, eventually they hit a point that they're not producing enough new snow to rebuild the snowpacks, and the snowpacks are going to slowly start melting. Therefore, the glaciers built up for approximately 500 years and then decreased for the next 200. Simultaneously, the atmosphere would continue to clear of the volcanic debris, so that would just slowly start disappearing over years. I don't know how long that would take, but it surprises me how long even Mount St. Helens was in the atmosphere. It was quite a while until all that debris disappeared. As the glaciers receded, glacial dams would form and break, causing erosion from mass flooding. This was that whole scablands thing that we talked about, that Lake Missoula carving the gorge up through Washington and all that stuff. Tremendous amount of hydrological activity as a result of these dams breaking. So I didn't think I had enough material for the day. So we still have the problem of, how did people get from after they left the Ark? How did they repopulate the whole Earth? How did they get to Australia? How did they get to South America? We have people groups all over the place, and we've said the continents are moving. Well, they didn't walk across the Atlantic to get there, so how's that possible? Well, the sea levels would have been significantly lower, and we're talking very significantly lower. The Bering Strait, there's actual evidence that the Bering Strait was dry during this period, that it was a grassy plain that you could actually walk, and people did, 1,000 miles worth of grassy plain that people and animals could walk across to get from Russia to the United States or to Canada. Australia would have been practically accessible via land the whole way. England wasn't even an island. England was connected to Europe. The whole English Channel didn't exist. It was dry. So what you end up with is people get across right up through here, you can see, well, you can't really see it through there, but that would be the English Channel area in there. And this pretty much connected. So it would not be hard for people and animals to actually migrate to all parts of the earth because of the Ice Age. What about the arguments of frozen mammoths? We're going to hit some of this quickly. Remains of hundreds of thousands of woolly mammoths have been found across northern Europe, Siberia, and Alaska. Remains have been found in all stages of decay. Majority show substantial decay. Some even with flies and have been actually pecked at by scavengers. Some have been found completely intact. Some of the intact even have undigested stomach contents. The interesting thing is the stomach contents of some of them that have been found were warm weather plants, meaning that these animals weren't just colder kind of climate animals. So how did they get frozen where they were? Is a good question. Evolutionists, they have absolutely no explanation. Creation has a possible explanation, and that is mammoths would have been buried near the end of the Ice Age, approximately 500 to 700 years after the flood. Because the oceans were warmer and the polar regions were not frozen like they are today, that would produce temperate climates at the coastline. So the coastlines would have been very habitable areas. Mammoths would have lived near the edge of these ice sheets in those habitable areas. As the oceans cooled, precipitation decreased. Soils and all would have still been problematic at that point. So you'd end up with things drying out, and you're going to have dust because it's going to blow because you don't have the ground being solidified with plant material that quickly. And these animals could have easily been buried in muck or buried in dry dust that then was encapsulated them. Finally, as the oceans cooled even more, the polar regions began to freeze over and the land froze into permafrost, freezing the buried carcasses. So they were probably not frozen to begin with. They were probably buried in normal conditions of dust and muck and then refrozen as permafrost later. I had a couple other slides here. One talking about coal, because we talked about coal and diamonds before. Coal is compressed organic material laid down in massive quantities, which is interesting. It's not like, oh, we laid down a ½ inch this year and a ½ inch, 100 years from now. No, we're talking massive amounts of coal being deposited at one time. That is very indicative of some kind of a massive event like a flood. A conventional view, millions of years to transform coal or organics into coal. Well, the creationist view is that actually can occur much, much more quickly than that, because it's actually been demonstrated at this point that you can create coal in the lab in a much shorter time frame. Diamonds, similar explanation. Traditional view, they're thought to be millions or billions of years old, creating from tremendous heat and all in the Earth's core is one of the ways. Also in subduction zones where plates meet, that causes the pressures that they need. What I find interesting is they also claim that diamonds can be created from asteroid strikes, which goes against the rest of their theory, because an asteroid strike is an instantaneous event. It's not an event that takes millions of years. It hits and it's creating diamonds. So we're talking instantaneous kind of diamond creation. And they're also talking that diamonds have been proposed to have been created in space through space objects interacting. I'm not even going to get into that one. But what's interesting is synthetic diamonds. You can actually grow diamonds now, and it's done all the time. I mentioned before, Trisha is creating a diamond for each of her pets as they pass. And that process, it doesn't take that long. They're grown in the lab. They start with an acid and I don't know exactly how the whole process is done, but in 6 to 10 weeks, they go and generate a diamond. And I know this to be true because Trisha's done it, and the whole process took about 9 months. Because the first part is they have to go and burn the material and get it cremated to the appropriate purity levels first. Then they start the diamond creation process with the remaining carbon. Diamonds are just carbon. They just happen to be carbon atoms arranged in a very precise way through pressure and heat. So none of these things take millions or billions of years that the evolutionists propose. So in summary, Ice Age is hinted at in Job. I actually think it's more than hinted at. I think those are direct references to the Ice Age. It is so consistent with the rest of the science involved. The Ice Age is a result of warm oceans and colder continents, so that the two, you need both ingredients. It's absolutely critical to understand that it's not a slow process. You need the real warm water and you need something cold, the continents. Ice Age was approximately 500 years long, right after the flood, and that frozen mammoths probably became extinct at the end of that Ice Age. Man's migration would not have been very problematic given the low sea levels at the time. And we're running out of time. So let's see if this one. Wait. Oh, we'll get it.
We have never seen all through history that a man could save himself. Every work of man since the world began never kept one soul from hell. But God looked down in grace and love and met our greatest need. By His own hand and His perfect plan, we are free, yes, free indeed. What we needed was a Savior, pure and sinless, dying for the wrong we'd done. What we needed was a holy sacrifice, God's only begotten Son. When the world all around was bound for hell, all earthly hope was lost. What we needed was a grace and mercy God provided on a rugged cross.
Many men have tried to be satisfied by the things this world affords. They have placed their faith in another way and rejected Christ our Lord.
But the Father longs to reveal to them what they needed all along. It is there to claim in Jesus' name. At the cross and stain is gone. What we needed was a Savior, pure and sinless, dying for the wrong we'd done. What we needed was a holy sacrifice, God's only begotten Son. When the world all around was bound for hell, all earthly hope was lost. What we needed was a grace and mercy God provided on a rugged cross, dying for the wrong we'd done. What we needed was a holy sacrifice, God's only begotten Son. When the world all around was bound for hell, all earthly hope was lost. What we needed was a grace and mercy God provided on a rugged cross. When the world all around was bound for hell, all earthly hope was lost. What we needed was a grace and mercy God provided on a rugged cross.
Brad just pulled up on his phone a picture of the glacial rocks right on property that we own, just a half mile from my house. I should have incorporated those into my presentation. I promise the next couple weeks, we're going to have more opportunity to go and ask some questions. There's 2 more weeks and then we're done. So let's just close in prayer. Lord, thanks again for the opportunity we have to come here, fellowship together, and to study your word and understand what it is, the magnificent creation you have created here for us to enjoy and to understand. Be with us this coming week as we head to church and throughout the week. Keep us safe. Amen.
Yeah.